Hello, and thank you so much for coming to the Katie Halper Show. On this Wednesday evening, we are doing another one of our special Self-Care for All sessions. And for people who don't know, this is something that I decided to do because I was going to say because I'm tired. I am tired and I need to work on my sleep hygiene, but I'm also tired of self-care being something that is considered just the domain of people who with a lot of money. There's also a lot of discussion sometimes, I think, among the left where we think of self-care as being antithetical to fighting to make the world a better place and more societal and structural critiques of the world. And that is something that I don't agree with, but I do understand because sometimes some of the people who do self-care are a little precious, a little out of touch, and focus on the personal and the inner and themselves to the extent of to the detriment of the collective and the communal. So I've been doing some of these sessions, and the idea is that you don't just hear and view a speaker, but you actually do something with them. And this next guest is one of like the perfect people for this subject because she really embodies the personal as political. In fact, as you'll see, I think she thinks it's amusing that people think those things can be separated as easily as they can be. You've seen her on the show before. She is an author, an award-winning author, a bestseller, New York Times bestseller, but also ran for president. She's an activist. She is a humanitarian, a feminist, and anti-war activist. And she also just started her own Substack called Transform with Marianne Williamson. And of course, I'm speaking of, no surprise, Marianne Williamson. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Katie.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, honey. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me. I'm always glad to be with you.
So you're someone who really, I think, understands and articulates and engages in these two worlds, the political and the personal, or the spiritual and the material. Can you talk about your understanding of that connection? Is there a division even?
We have to move away from a simply transactional model of politics to a transformational model. If you only work on the externalities of the problems, then you're not moving into the deepest root causes, number one. But number two, as Mahatma Gandhi said, the end is inherent in the means. A bunch of angry people are not going to bring peace to the earth. Everything we do is infused with the energy with which we do it, the consciousness with which we do it, how we approach people, how we approach situations. You know, one of my favorite Martin Luther King lines is where he said, "You have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt." So there's a level of anger and snarkiness and cynicism and all of that, which is like the white sugar of political activism. It's adrenaline backed and you get almost a high from it, but then you crash. And you also all you do is get applause from people who already agree with you. Real change is going to have to involve moral persuasion, as Dr. King said, and as Lincoln said, and as so many people have talked about. I also think that what's happening in the world today has literally, it's an assault on our nervous systems. We are genuinely afraid, our nerves are afraid. And in that state, we make mistakes. It doesn't set us up for success at political effectiveness any more than it sets us up for effectiveness in any other area. And this is a long haul. I think with what's going on in the world today, every day it's clearer and clearer that the kinds of changes that we need to see happen are not going to take a year or 4 years or 8 years. We need to all settle into a long. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint to change the world in the ways we need to change even our own country right now. So taking care of who we are and attending to our own character defects so that we can be more persuasive, more effective, is part of what it will take to transform the world.
And have you had that sense for a while? I mean, I think I was interviewing you once and you said that your generation, you would go out to a protest during the day and then read Ram Dass.
Yeah.
Do you think that there was more of an understanding of that connection before?
Well, the period that I grew up in, it was a revolutionary time that was cultural, it was musical, it was sexual, it was political, it was all of those things. We didn't think in terms of a separation. There was it listening to the Rolling Stones, when people would say to me, one young guy once said to me, Katie, you're an ex-hippie, you guys, which I really wasn't, you just were sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I remember my response to him was, that was just part of the day. Right. We also stopped the war. Okay. So yes, we would read Ram Dass in the morning, and we would go to anti-war protests in the afternoon. And it all felt like one large change in the culture. Remember, there was a draft in those days, so you couldn't separate. The Vietnam War, it wasn't possible to put it over on the side because it was us, it was our boyfriends, it was our husbands, it was our sons, it was our brothers, our best friends. That's what it was for women. Of course, for the men themselves, and what was your number, and did you have a low draft number or a high draft number? And there was not the laughing at the spiritual things that there is today. What happened after when everything, when the assassinations occurred and all of the horrors of that time, those two areas sort of split. I often say that the traditional political types took the East Coast and the more spiritual types took the West Coast. Not quite as simple as that, but there's something to the fact that there was this rift, and both sort of looked at the other there was a lot of mutual disdain. A lot of people in the more political world looking at the spiritual types like the things that you said, like we don't care about what's going on the planet. But a lot of the spiritual types look at the political types and think you are so naive if you think just changing on that level is going to get it all done. Now, there are the stereotypes on both sides. There are those spiritual types who have only been into navel gazing and essential oils and being all narcissistic with a spiritual cover. That world exists, and I've known about that world for a long time and have been loud within the transformational community yelling about it. But there are also people in the political realm who have their own issues that perhaps they might want to deal with.
Right. I know it's funny because when you're talking about anger and persuasion, I think that there are also different roles and different moments, because I think of how much Bernie galvanized people through his righteous anger. And, his anger is directed at certain people. And then he would not project the venom and the contempt and the smugness that you mentioned to other people. Do you know what I mean? Like, who is it? Will Rogers who said, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable?
No, there was never. It wasn't Will Rogers.
Who was it?
Yeah. That is our job, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
Yeah. And there is something to that. And there is something, as you said, kind of like white sugar, or about anger. It can be hypnotic. And then I think you can use it for good. But for me, and you do have to persuade certain people, but the other thing is that when I really I think anger and outrage really drives a lot of what I do. But I also know that if I'm really upset about something, like in my personal life, I can't be, maybe this is TMI, but that's what the show is about a little bit, even when it's not about the self-care stuff. I can't really be as productive or focused on my work if I'm upset about something, which is just one for me of the examples where self-care is about the collective. Because to the extent that I think, it's important to be interviewing other people, covering this story, covering that story, writing about this, bringing attention to that, for me, that requires some focus on the inner. And I've said this a few times, but it reminds me of something that Nina Turner also mentioned, which is the oxygen masks on the plane, and you're like instructed to put those on first and then you put them on the child. Mm-hmm. So it's not, for me at least, it's not the self-care, mm-hmm. that the end is not self-improvement. The end is actually ultimately about being a more effective person in the world.
Yeah.
towards others, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
because everything you do, as I said, carries the consciousness. And I also think when you were talking about Bernie just now, that was a moral outrage. There's a difference between white sugar anger and moral outrage.
Right.
There was a difference between righteous and self-righteous. You know, Katie, I don't know if I've ever told you the story. In 2016, before Bernie announced that he was going to run for president, I was doing a conference. I used to do these conferences about women getting into politics called Sister Giant. And I was a big Bernie fan, and I asked Bernie if he would speak at it. It was in Los Angeles. And it was during the time, clearly, when he was thinking about whether or not he would run. And he accepted the invitation. And when he gave his talk, and it was at a hotel ballroom in Los Angeles, and there were about 1,000 people in the room. And at the end, he gave one of his marvelous Bernie talks. And at the end, somebody yelled, "You gonna run for president?" And this was during, I had at this point come onto the stage because there were going to be questions and answers. So the first question was, "You gonna run for president?" And he said, "Would you be there for me? If I do, would you be there for me?" You know, because clearly I think he was trying to gauge it, right? And everybody went nuts with, "Yeah!" And there was all this screaming and yelling, "Yeah, yeah, 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 yeah." And I took the microphone and I said, "Wait a minute. If I were the senator and I asked you if you would be there for me if I ran for president, your response that you just gave would not give me confidence. So we're going to do something, please. And this is going to be done in silence. I'd like you all to sit down. And I'm going to ask you a question. This is like I said, it's going to be done in silence. Please do not make noise a part of this." I said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to really think about it. If the answer is yes, after you've really thought about it, would you please stand up?" And the question is this: if Senator Sanders runs for president, would you really work for it? Would you do more than just jump up and down tonight? Would you get involved with the campaign? Would you become an active volunteer? Would you work to make it happen in your state? Would you raise money? Would you give money if you can afford it? Would you really carve out a piece of your life in order to help him win? And then there was silence, right? And then, Katie, it was so amazing. Slowly, and then it happened fast. People would just stand up and stand there. Some people would go like this. I remember one man going like this. People would go, they put their raise up, people just stand there quietly. And ultimately, I think 99.5% of the room stood up. Total silence. And I'll never forget the look on Bernie's face. He looked back at me like, "Who are you people?" You know, like, what was this? It was really profound. And that's the difference. The first, I said to him, I said, not to him, I said to the audience, I said, "What you just did was like you threw a bunch of candy bars. That's not going to win." Because remember, this was when he was, as he said to me that day, and as everybody realized, he didn't want to run if it was going to do more harm than good. So he was going around speaking at events like this to gauge. But it was really amazing. And when people were really given the chance and then told, "Only stand up if it's really true," boy, it was really profound and beautiful what you saw in people's faces and in their body language.
I just we're going to get into more of a discussion about the personal and political. A lot of people in the comments are bringing up Afghanistan.
Yes.
So just wanted to give you the chance to talk about that. And
well,
I know, yeah.
Well, obviously it was a 20-year debacle. I was very aware of the Taliban and its treatment of women even before 9/11. It was quite an issue for a lot of people. And I was one of them. Clearly, our being there, people say, well, we weren't there for the women. No, we were not there for the women. However, a side effect of it is that there were opportunities for women and girls that they would not have had under the Taliban. And to me, the fact that we should leave does not lessen that tragedy. Both things are true. Both things are true. We should not have been there this long. We needed to leave. It was an imperialistic, militaristic enterprise that had more to do with making money for the military-industrial complex than any other reason. All that is true. And it is also true. And I find so many people unwilling to recognize the tragedy there. I do not join in the St. Biden thing going on right now. This evacuation was terrible. He did not have to take the military out first. He could have taken the people out first. There were so many people who needed to be evacuated. And I also think this blaming of the Afghan forces, so much more is involved. So did we need to leave? Absolutely. I know a lot of people, and perhaps people that are writing in your chat, I did have a reactive, stupid moment of agreeing with Bill Kristol, of all people, who said we could have just kept 2,500 troops there. I did. It was the beginning. I'm like, the women. It was a stupid tweet. I tried to say that, but it's very difficult sometimes to get forgiveness from the Twitter mob. But I ran for president talking as only Tulsi Gabbard did. Bernie to some extent, but Tulsi and I were the only ones talking as much as we did about the military-industrial complex. So I'm not someone who doesn't realize, and I'm not someone who doesn't realize that we needed to go. But I certainly do not apologize for my heartbreak about these women, about the thousands of people at the airport. This did not need to happen this way, Katie. I've talked to many people about this. So just as I find some people minimizing, obviously people on the right, minimizing the suffering of the Afghan people for 20 years, which is very, very valid, our argument on the left. But I also don't understand how and why so many people, some on the left, are minimizing the horror of what is happening right now. There's some who say, well, we're not minimizing it, but there's a little bit of, oh, yeah, oh, that.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
That's why I am. The brain is complicated. It's like when you sometimes get out of a romantic relationship and you need to leave and you're still in grief.
Right.
The two things can be true at the same time. We needed to leave. We shouldn't have been there. We certainly shouldn't have been there that long. Although at the time we went in, the whole idea of Al-Qaeda, perhaps. But I unfortunately don't think this story is over. And I agree with what's happening now.
But
yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I think we actually
that enough for the people. I can't see what your chat is.
Oh, I don't know. I think so. There's always going to be mixed reviews. And I think that we actually had, I won't say who because I don't want to announce it, but we had a guest on Useful Idiots this week who was a veteran who talked about how there could have been a better, he actually says it's a big problem, it's an immigration problem actually, and it kind of speaks to how messed up our immigration system is, that it's not that the lack of planes, flights. I think that there's
a lot of it has to do with the timing. The military left first. You get the people out first. They could have had an organized operation. They could have had an organized operation when they still could, when there was still military there. It could have been planned. It could have been strategized. It's like in any relationship, how you leave is as important as how you stay.
Mm-hmm.
And the exit has been, to say it's poorly executed, and with such lack of humanitarian concern. But you're talking about the immigration issue as well, right?
Yeah. And, I think that there's also a big difference between people talking about humanitarian concerns now who are anti-war and people who didn't say anything about the wars, or droning or executions. You know what I mean? Like, people have selective, not you. I think that's what one of the big differences there's, what's really frustrating and disturbing is this selective concern that we see from some people on the right and some people on MSNBC also, right? Not a word about the drones.
But I see that selective concern on the left as well.
You mean
because of the women? This is horrifying. And this is not like Saudi Arabia. This is not like many of the places where women do not have the rights that we would wish for. This is a systemic brutality, the likes of which it seems some people have not read too much about. Let's hope that the Taliban will be different this time. So I found some selective compassion on both sides. And you know what, Katie, can we stop it with, at a certain point, we have to talk about these things beyond only the oppositional issues. And in this particular case, all of the above is true. All of the above is true.
Yeah. I think that it's what I'm talking about isn't even the left versus right as much as I think almost all of the media. Of legacy
absolutely.
media.
They would have been talking about Afghanistan for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And
right.
One of the things that I saw that on my presidential campaign, that I would say, we're not even talking about foreign policy.
Yeah.
Why are we not even talking about it? And
right.
Because it didn't fit the narrative that either the Democratic Party any more than the Republican Party wanted to be having.
Right. And also, of course, the question of, I think what you're saying is true, honestly, but I think that the U.S., I just don't think that the U.S. has done the right thing foreign policy wise since World War II.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Katie.
Right. So it's hard, like when they're not in there for the right reasons, you have, and someone pointing this out, like it's true. And Mike Preisner pointed this out that, people who care, if you care about women and girls, obviously, and like, this is not directed at you. This is directed at MSNBC, right? It's like, if you care about women and girls, you should have cared about, and you should continue to care about airstrikes, right? And the puppet government, the warlords, what the CIA did. So, again, there's a difference between being committed to these principles and
it is also true how many girls went to school in the last 20 years and were out of their home and could leave the house without being accompanied by a male and were not whipped by the morality police if their wrist showed. That's true too. That's true too.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know what the numbers are about that. I'm not denying that there's a difference between the Taliban and the non-Taliban. I just don't know what the difference is between.
Like the airstrikes are more important. There's no how can you talk about more or less important when you're talking about human experience and suffering like that? But
well, I guess because it depends on where, because one of them is the result of our government. And I'm not saying like we should turn our back on other countries at all. I'm not saying that I don't believe in isolationism. But women are obviously, when there's like instability or war, that also has a disproportionate effect on women.
Absolutely, it does. And that's true in any war. It's right. Women and children who are killed more than anyone else in wars.
Yeah. Anyway, well, there's always a lot to talk about here. In fact, tomorrow night, I'm having on Danny Surgeon, and Kathy Kelly, who are going to be. Danny is a veteran, and Kathy Kelly is a peace activist. She's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize like 3 times, and they're going to be talking about this also. So
yes, I did an interview the other night with Laura Jadid, who did that incredible piece called Afghanistan Meant Nothing. That's on my YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah.
I will also be interviewing Zainab who founded Women for Women, also Laurie Adams from Women for Women, another man I know who spent a lot of time, a journalist, Tom Freston, who spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. So I think all of us are doing some important. We just need to hear everybody's voice right now.
Yeah. So, let's see, shifting gears a little bit, back to the self-care, which I know sounds weird, but can't burn out. You can't burn out when you're doing this stuff, right? So what else would you, for people who are watching and are looking for tips about self-care, what advice do you have about that?
There's a line from Dalai Lama. His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, "To save the world, we must have a plan, but no plan will work unless we meditate." And I think that, whether you call it meditation, whether you see things in a spiritual or religious perspective, such as prayer, whether you are triggered by those things, so you go for the more secular perspective of mindfulness, it's all the same thing. And I also, one of the things that I've talked about quite a bit, Katie, is that if you look at the history of the United States, the spiritual and religious communities have been deeply involved, even generatively, in all of the great social justice movements. The abolitionist movement came in large part, it emerged from the early evangelicals in New Hampshire. Women's suffragettes, many of the women's movement suffragette leaders were Quakers. Quakers have had a very significant, and still do, the Friends National Committee on Legislation, because of this idea of the light within us all. And of course, Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. So it's really aberrational that people on the left are taking this, sometimes, some, not everyone, such a strongly, what I believe is an over-secularized perspective that shows a lot of contempt for a river of unfoldment in American history that has been very deep and meaningful, and has had, without which I think a lot of these social justice movements would not have been as successful as they were.
Right. I mean, I'm agnostic. I'm probably 99% atheist, but I definitely appreciate, liberation theology, obviously Martin Luther King,
Reverend Barber.
Yeah, William Barber, been on the show. Great speaker, great, really motivating person. Joshua Heschel. Yeah. And Ambedkar. So I think that there's, and again, I just think that we can be honest, or I'll be honest at least about the need to do. And again, it's not like I'm this, I mean, it's one thing to turn your back on the rest of the world, but I do think that, this is a good important point that James Cromwell from Tewa. So James Cromwell was on the show, the great actor and environmental activist and vegan.
Years ago in LA.
Yeah. And he was saying how we need to have a paradigm shift. That's, something from within. And again, I'm saying this very aware of the fact that not everyone can afford to have that. You know what I mean? Not everyone
can have a paradigm shift. Having a paradigm shift does not cost money.
No, but I mean, access to even thinking about this stuff can, I don't know. I don't think that.
I think that's part of the. I don't think that's true. I've known people in prison. I've worked with people in prisons who were meditating. I've known people. I lived in Detroit and had quite a lot of experience with some impoverished communities. And yes, they were meditating. I think actually it's the opposite of what people think. I think it's very pretentious and kind of disrespectful to act like if somebody's poor, they don't know how to. They can't do this. Some of the poorest people in the United States are in communities that are deeply religious. Some of the poorest communities in the United States are practicing meditation.
I guess I mean more the like going away into the woods for days. But yeah, people can do it on a daily level.
What's happening inside your head has nothing to do with how much money you have. I think that has to do with what you were talking about earlier, this projection onto the conversation that you're just talking about, rich girls in expensive yoga pants who are, talking about essential oils and, that world exists. I mean, I'm not saying that world doesn't exist. but to pin onto anybody talking about a deeper spiritual perspective on politics and global change, to project onto, well, us, because I've certainly had that onto myself, is simply, it's an inaccurate portrayal of many people's lives.
Mm. Yeah. Well, someone in the chat says, I'm an Uber driver and student, and I do this.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, this idea that, yeah. And it's funny because it claims to be this kind of proletarian attitude that,
right.
but it really is very an arrogant attitude.
Yeah, I know.
If somebody's poor, so they don't know how to close their eyes. I mean, hello.
Right. Yeah, I'm curious. I wonder what the hours spent on self-care are.
I don't. By the way, it's funny that you use that term. I find the term itself a little myself.
Well, what I don't know what to call it.
Well, I understand what you're saying. So
yeah.
I understand.
I mean, I'm
self-care. The problem I have with the notion of self-care actually does go back into this notion that there are some people who think it's all about themselves. I was at a place once, I saw this big sign that said, love yourself. And I mentioned to somebody, Jesus didn't come to earth to say, love yourself. He came to the earth and said, love one another,
right.
Love each other. And that radical compassion, Buddha, all the great religious avatars and teachers spoke of love for others, not just love for ourselves. But self-care, as you've pointed out, and I think you're very right, self-care is not just about loving oneself. It's about taking care of oneself so that you can actually be better and more effective in the world. You had mentioned my Substack, and my article yesterday is titled "The Power of a Quiet Mind," and I talked about meditation and why it's so important for all the reasons you and I have been talking about.
Okay, so do you want to take questions about this? It's up to you. Do you want to lead something?
Anything you want, sure.
Okay, so do you want to do something that people can follow?
Well, I think that, meditation, God knows I have enough meditations on
online. Yeah, maybe I can play one. You can leave, I'll play one.
In fact, I wrote a meditation this morning on the bottom of my article. I wrote a meditation yesterday on the bottom of my article. I have my book Illuminata, actually, which I wrote back in the 90s. I'm gonna read to you here some of my prayers, and you tell me which one you want to read. I think it might surprise you, some of these.
This is cool. Dhamma Bros is a meditation that takes place in a prison. Have you heard about that? That sounds very interesting.
Yes, and there's a lot of wonderful stuff that goes on, spiritual stuff that goes on inside prisons. Also, a lot of far right wing.
Yeah, not so great spiritual.
I have prayer for the world, prayer for the healing of nations, prayer of amends to the African American, prayer of amends to the Native American, hatred in America, healing America, prayer for America. Those are all. This was back in the 90s, so I was really on all this racial reconciliation stuff back then. You want me to read one of those?
Sure, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want the world, amends to the African American, amends to the Native American, hatred in America?
How about hatred in America?
Hatred in America. What does it say? Of course, this was before everything became like it was, as it is. Oh, this is a whole, oh my goodness, this is not a prayer, actually. Well, this is okay, this is a whole section that the source of violence is in our heads, as it would not be appropriate to ignore just a little cancer in the body. So it is not appropriate for us to ignore just a little violent thinking. A little cancer unchecked turns into a monstrous killer. So do small, insidious, seemingly harmless, judgmental thought forms become the pervasive cancers that threaten to destroy a society. As the body's defenses against cancer center around a healthy immune system, our chief defense against violence in America is our own individual efforts to cleanse our minds of violent thinking. Each and every one of us tends to be angrier and less tolerant of others than we know in our hearts we should be. A healthy, civilized society can absorb some anger and dysfunction, as a healthy immune system can absorb some disease. But a massive buildup of anger and mean-spiritedness bombarding our social system day in and day out in millions upon millions of individual doses overwhelms our societal defenses. Medicine does little good in the absence of a healthy immune system. Likewise, police and other institutional efforts to counter violence do little good. This was in the 90s. Ultimately, in the absence of our individual efforts to deal with it. Violence is routed out of the world only by being routed out of our minds. Hatred is diseased thinking. Just as a cancer cell was a healthy cell that then transformed, so is hatred, love gone wrong. In the area of both mind and body, we must think more in terms of cultivating health rather than always waiting for a time in which we inevitably must fight disease. Each of us is a cell in the social body. Whether we are a malignant or a healing force is up to each of us on a moment-by-moment basis. With every thought, we decide whether to be a cancer cell or a healthy immune cell, and whether to give in to the tendency to place blame on others or to be a vehicle for God's love and forgiveness. Either we clean up the anger or the anger will overwhelm us. The only thing we can be 100% responsible for is in our minds, our own minds. The recognition that this is indeed quite a lot must now break through into mass awareness. In the United States today, there is a widespread malignant thought form that other people are the problem. Conservatives tend to blame liberals for our problems, while liberals blame conservatives. The media blames almost everyone, and almost everyone these days blames immigrants. Some people are convinced homosexuals are the problem, while other people think single mothers are the problem. Still others think the Christian right is the problem, and far, far too many people think that our parents were the problem. The entire culture has become a hysterical blame session. Yet a healthy, vital society is not one in which we all agree. It is one in which those who do disagree can do so with honor and respect for other people's opinions and an appreciation of our shared humanity. Without personal commitment to the attributes of fair play and integrity, the United States is in grave danger. Malice and intolerance stalk our society, staking claim to our minds, and not one corner of our social order is unaffected. This darkness is a significant threat to our national good, perhaps the most significant threat in our history, for it strikes at the heart of democracy. Where people are not free to disagree, there can be no democracy, since that is what democracy is. Hitler could never have risen to power had it not been for vast numbers of people who gave him that power. Although they did not share his hatred, they did not have a solid moral commitment to not hate. Only a society in which there is a widespread commitment to not hate is safe from hate. A little hatred is like a little cancer, and who among us does not hate? The only way to protect our freedom is to check the hatred in our own minds. Our political conversation must shift away from the mass infantile finger pointing that now pervades it. It is not liberals or conservatives who have ruined or are ruining America. It is the tendency on so many people's parts to think that their way is the right way and the people who disagree with them are bad. It doesn't ultimately matter so much how we degenerated into such mass disrespect for the rights of others to hold opinions different from our own. What does matter is that we commit immediately to individual healing through the grace of God from our own tendency to condemn whom God himself would not condemn. Listen, this is so 90s. God loves Bill Clinton and Rush Limbaugh both, and he loves them equally. He sees through their politics, and he asks us to do the same. That might be a bitter pill for some people to swallow. It's the only medicine which will heal us, however, for it is a return to a spiritually healthy ground of being. God does not need us to condemn each other on his behalf, but to love each other on his behalf. From that awareness, we can disagree vehemently, yet appropriately. Disagreement must be respectful, or the disagreement itself poisons us more than either side's position in the argument ever could. Our freedom is ultimately not guaranteed by the Constitution. The only thing that guarantees freedom ultimately is our own commitment to it. That commitment must include our capacity to love each other as human beings, to remember we are brothers and sisters on this planet, and to surrender to God any thoughts we have to the contrary. Let us not be deceived. Each of us is host to anger each day, just as each of us is host to love. Pray for your friends, but by all means, pray for your enemies. And don't pray that they'll change. Pray that you might change from an accusatory mind to a loving one. Without a spiritual basis, every system disintegrates. Any branch that does not bear fruit will fall off the tree. We mustn't think America is immune to the viruses that destroy nations any more than any of us are immune to the flu if it's coming through town. Many of the things that most of us were brought up to think could never happen here have already begun to happen. Dangerous scapegoating, violent hate crimes, small-minded intolerance for the views of others. This was the early 90s. At what point are symptoms seen as signs of critical disease? And at what point do we wake up enough to know that without treatment, this disease will destroy us? It is more important that we renew dignified and respectful dialogue with those who do not agree with us than that we keep slavishly congratulating those who have the wisdom to see things our way. Within each of us lies the disease, and within each of us lies the divine physician. We must pray to him to be healed and made whole. And then this is the prayer, and this is what I'll leave you with. Dear God, please remove from my mind the tendency to judge. Please remove from my mind the tendency to hate. Please remove from my mind the tendency to blame. Please reveal to me, Lord, a way to stand in my power through love instead of fear and through peace instead of violence. May I hear not the voice for anger, but only the voice for love. And teach me, dear God, how not to hate those who hate me. Transform all darkness into light and use my mind as an instrument of your harmlessness. I surrender to you my thoughts of violence. Take these thoughts, dear God, and wash them clean. Thank you very much. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
You and I talked about, well, what will we do? And then it happened.
Yeah. Just like you said to me once that I asked you what I should start with meditation. You're like, just pick something. It'll find you.
5 minutes in the morning, even 5 minutes in the morning. We wake up in the morning, and if you give your mind over immediately to newspaper and computer and television and radio and your phone, your mind is most open to new impressions in the morning. All religious and spiritual systems talk about the power of the will. So you claim your mind, you claim your nervous system for a more grounded place before you even look at that stuff, or there's no mystery otherwise why you're depressed by noon. You talked about sleep hygiene when you started. Everybody takes a shower, takes a bath because you don't want to take yesterday's dirt onto your body. But if you don't meditate, if you don't have some prayer, meditation, mindfulness, inspirational time, then you're taking yesterday's stress into the day, on your mind, on your heart. And these days, not only your own, people in all over the world. So this issue that you're bringing up is really important, and I think particularly important for those of us who are activists, because otherwise it can make you really bitter.
Mm-hmm.
I know after my campaign, I really had to, there's that saying, you can be bitter or you can be better.
Yeah.
We've got to be here for the long haul, and we've got to be conduits for something other than just hatred.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This was great, Marianne. I really want to thank you, and everyone check out Marianne's Substack. It's really great. And thanks for taking part of this. You're, perfect person for this topic, this area. And we'll definitely have you back to talk about more stuff.
Well, I love you. Thank you. You and I text sometimes late at night. I have a good one. Also, I want to make sure that everybody knows the first Transform podcast on my Substack. I hope you'll listen to it. It's called Transforming Capitalism, Part 1. I don't know if you've listened to it yet, Katie, but I hope you will. And I hope everybody will give it a listen because we've got some great voices in there.
Richard
Wolff and Stephanie Kelton and all the gang. Yeah. It's put together in a really cool way. I hope people will listen.
Yes. Definitely. And I'll leave a review.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. If you like it. If you don't like it.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
If you don't like it, just text me and tell me privately.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, again, thank you so much. Everyone check out Marianne's Substack, and we will have you back on soon, and have a great night. Everyone watching, have a great night, Marianne. And also come back for Thursday. We're going to have another self-care session, and we're going to have our regular show. Our regular show is at 7 p.m. And thank you so much. And subscribe to if you like this, subscribe to the self-care playlist that I have going on.
Okay. I love you, Katie. Thank you.
Love you. Bye.